Speaking for the first time in public since the Super Bowl parade, John Schneider has sights on running it back, but is it going to be easy for the Seahawks to actually be able to do that? It's all going to start in Combine Week. We're going to be breaking it all down here on our Tuesday edition, Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greatest 12, this is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here on our Tuesday show by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in, whether you're in Everett, Washington, or tuning in from Sand Creek, Illinois. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week and helping Locked On Podcast Network become the #1 sports podcast network. NFL Combine now officially underway. John Schneider speaking with the media in Indianapolis. We're going to take a deep dive into a few of the comments that he had today during his first public appearance since the Super Bowl celebration, one that sounds like he maybe wishes he could forget about just a little bit. We'll dive into that. And then we have Combine prospects to watch. Yesterday, it was all about the running backs and edge rushers. We're going to stay in the trenches on offense with guards, and we've got cornerbacks, which might be the deepest position group in this year's draft. Without further ado, let's get to it. Now for your lead story here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. For the first time since the Super Bowl parade in downtown, John Schneider met with the media at the Combine, diving into a variety of topics. If you've ever been at a press conference for a general manager at the Combine, it's a little different setting than when you have the general manager speaking with reporters here at the VMAC. You get all kinds of fun questions on the podium with media members from all over the country. That being said, there's still plenty of interesting stuff we can parse out of that press conference. And Rob, first and foremost, the question about how the Seahawks are going to handle trying to retain this roster, as many of their players from their Super Bowl team as they can. John Schneider had this to say: obviously, we'd love to have everybody. We want to have everybody back, right? When you get it done with something special like that, you're like, let's run it back. Let's run it back. But there's always that caveat. This is all about the way that the 70-man roster looks, who fits into the financial puzzle. So obviously, as much as they would love to run it back all the way, we know just how tricky it is to keep these championship teams together when you head into free agency.
It's just the reality of having an actual salary cap. When you win a Super Bowl, you want to reward everybody. You want to be like Oprah, here's money, here's money, here's money. And you basically give everybody of your free agents. Hell, you want to, reward the cooks and the secretaries, everybody, because what a magical season it was. But the Seahawks have such difficult decisions to make. We've talked about this before with Kenneth Walker III, hopefully, or potentially extending Jackson Smith and Jigba, Devin Witherspoon, the cornerback situation we'll be talking about a little bit later as well. The Seahawks have big decisions to make here, Corbin. It sounds easy. Oh my goodness, you have $60+ million in free agent space. You're one of the youngest rosters in all of the NFL. Just bring everybody back, run it back. As both John Schneider and Rashid Shaheed said, it's a lot more complicated in reality, especially when you only have 4 draft picks to work with.
Yeah, and the draft aspect, maybe that makes it a little easier for John Schneider to be willing to open up the checkbook for a few of these players because they don't have the draft capital there. But you have to be looking beyond just 2026 when you make all these decisions, because you've got a bunch of young players in your 2023 and 2024 draft classes that are going to be wanting to get paid here in the next couple of years. So this is not a one-season process. You have to be looking multiple years ahead when you are making these decisions. And I think that still makes Ken Walker III the toughest decision here for the Seattle Seahawks, because you have to consider the position, the shelf life that running backs have. You know where I stand on this, Rob. I've talked about it a lot. I scoff at the idea that a second contract for a really good running back is a problem because it wasn't till about 10 years ago. And I think there's plenty of talented running backs out there that are proving that they can play 8 to 10 years. So a 25-year-old Ken Walker III, there may be some things that you have reservations about in terms of guaranteed money, but I don't have as many reservations with that as what some people would. And I'm sure there's people in Seattle's front office that feel that way as well, especially if you're paying him $10 million per year. And then you've got to consider JSN needs that big contract, probably going to be the highest paid receiver in the NFL. Devin Witherspoon, he's going to be pushing for top 3, top 5 cornerback money, if not number 1 cornerback money. The Seahawks have a lot of expensive decisions that they have looming here in the near future that may be made this offseason with players that aren't free agents right now. So all of this puts cloudiness over some of the other decisions you have to make. And then you have the fact there's going to be players that just don't want to take deals before free agency starts. They want to see what the market looks like. Once you have other teams trying to play vultures and go get your players, it just becomes that much more difficult to be able to retain your players. There comes a point where you're going to say, look, Riq Woolen, we love you, but we're not paying $17 million a year to bring you back. That's the reality of the situation. If Seattle can get a bunch of these players re-signed before they become free agents, then maybe you can run this back really close to full tilt with last year's roster. But it's hard to believe with the way the NFL operates that a number of these guys are not going to be testing their value in the market when there's a lot of players that don't get the opportunity to ever do that. You want to take advantage of your shot to get paid.
No question about it. I mean, you understand from a player perspective, I mean, this is their opportunity. I mean, the player like Ken Walker III, who basically has made, I believe it's about $7 to $8 million over the first 4 years of his NFL career. That's an awful lot of beating to his body that he has, endured over his college and NFL career. Look, he's 25 years old. At the same time, he struggled with durability throughout much of his NFL career. So while, yes, I want to run it back, to use that expression yet again, at the same time, I think that talk about the $12+ million per season for a player that definitely was hot at the end of the season, but it was debatable early in the year who was Seattle's number 1 back. Was it Zach Charbonnet or was it Kenneth Walker III? For a player like a Rashid Shaheed, for example, who caught 0 touchdowns and rushed for 0 touchdowns since the Seattle made the trade to acquire him. The talk of giving him $12 to $15 million, what a lot of number 2 wide receivers receive in the NFL, that is difficult pill to swallow as well. And then obviously at the cornerback situation, we're going to be talking about this a little bit more moving forward, but Riq Woolen, when so many Seahawks fans are pulling their hair out in frustration about the big plays that he gave up, whether it be for scores, whether it be penalties, Josh Jobe, and some of the limitations that he has. Again, this is a much more complicated situation than a lot of Seahawks fans want to give it credit for.
Yeah, and there's a chance you could lose a vast majority of those players. You add Kobe Bryant to that mix as well. John Schneider made it clear today, we want to have all these guys back, but it's just really tricky to do that. And all that cap space goes away very quickly, especially when you start signing players like JSN and Devin Witherspoon, which, according to a few reporters that were on site that I've talked to, John Schneider made it clear those guys do not fit in that window. They have 2 years left, so we're not negotiating. That second year would be a 5th-year option. So he is more than happy to open up contract discussions with those 2 former first-round picks that certainly have earned massive extensions and are foundational pieces for this franchise moving forward. Sam Darnold, on the other hand, yeah, Sam had a great season, but he's got 2 years left in his deal. There isn't that extra option year in there. You have to wait probably till next offseason to open those discussions with your starting quarterback. That was another big-time takeaway coming out of Indianapolis today. When we come back, getting back to the actual players that are participating in the combine, there may not be a deeper position group in this year's draft class than the cornerback spot, which is interesting considering Seattle's free agent list. Rob and I are going to be dishing out 3 players apiece that we are really eager to see how they perform in Indianapolis this week and fit the puzzle as potential Seahawks targets. We'll get to that coming up next year on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. As the new year is rocking and rolling, a lot of people are trying to simplify their routines, and dinner is a big one. Between busy work days, cold winter nights, packed schedules, having an easy, reliable dinner plan makes a huge difference. And that's where Home Chef comes in. Home Chef takes the stress out of cooking by delivering fresh, pre-portioned ingredients right to your door with easy-to-follow recipes that actually taste great. They're rated #1 by users of other meal kits for quality, convenience, value, taste, and recipe ease, and it's easy to see why. Meals come ready to fit your schedule, 30-minute recipes, oven-ready trays, or quick lunches, over 30 weekly options, including family-sized meals and different dietary choices. Everything arrives pre-portioned, so there's less prep, less mess, and no wasted food. For a limited time, Home Chef is offering our listeners 50% off your first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. Just go to homechef.com/locked-on. That's homechef.com/locked-on for 50% off your first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. Must be an active subscriber to receive the free dessert. Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. He's Rob Rang. A special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate your support of the podcast. You live your team every single day. Make sure to check out the ad-free Everydayer Club for Locked On Seahawks. No interruptions. Private Discord club access to chat with Locked On hosts such as myself and much more. Just $5 a month or $50 a year. Check out the Seahawks, Locked On Seahawks Everydayer Club at lockedonseahawks.supercast.com today. The NFL Combine now well underway in Indianapolis. We're going to have some of the athletic testing kicking off tomorrow at Lucas Oil Stadium as players start to participate in the underwear Olympics, as some people like to call them. I believe the bench press is where everything is going to start tomorrow. And as we continue to look into position by position here, really our first draft analysis here on Locked On Seahawks for the season, Rob, we talked about the edge group yesterday maybe being the best fit for pick number 32 for the Seattle Seahawks. But I think if you're looking for what position may be second on the list there, and certainly in the discussion for one of their first two picks, cornerback might be the best overall position in this entire draft for the top tier talent and depth. And there's a lot of intriguing players to watch in this year's group that are going to be participating in the combine this week in Indianapolis.
Yeah, this is a very talented cornerback crop. Corbin, I view it as right there with wide receiver and the edge rushers as far as being the deepest and has the highest ceiling of the positional groups. And obviously it is a position of concern, as we talked about. Rick Woolen and Josh Jobe are both free agents. So this is clearly going to be a positional group that John Schneider and his scouts, the coaches for the Seahawks, are very much going to be paying attention to. I mentioned in yesterday's show about the edge rushers and having a number of them among my personal top 50 prospects. There are 7 cornerbacks in my top 50. And I think that many of them would be candidates for Seattle if one of those 7 were to be available to the Seahawks at number 32 overall, and obviously in any selection after that. They would be Mansour Delane from LSU, Colton Hood, Jermon McCoy, both from Tennessee, Avion Terrell from Clemson, Brandon Cisse from South Carolina, Chris Johnson from San Diego State, and then D'Angelo Pons, the playmaking, albeit diminutive corner from Indiana. I think if any one of those players are available to Seattle at number 32, including the last 2 I mentioned, Chris Johnson and D'Angelo Pons, I think the Seattle might have to consider them, just because if they don't retain either Rick Woolen or Josh Jobe, then obviously cornerback is a huge position of concern for this club. I have a hard time believing that Seattle is going to allocate $10+ million to somebody else in free agency other than their current free agent, Rick Woolen or Josh Jobe. And so therefore they would have to be looking towards the draft for just for bodies, even if it's just depth purposes. So I do think this is definitely going to be a position that the Seahawks are going to be focusing a great deal of attention on. One of my favorite players I want to talk about right off the bat is a player that I actually currently have as Seattle's pick at number 32 overall in my most recent mock draft at foxsports.com, and that's Brendan Cisse. This is a corner at South Carolina, began his college career at NC State. He's 6 foot, he's 200 pounds, and he is going to fly this weekend at the NFL Combine. He gets a little bit of questions from some out there because he's given up some big plays. And, this is a kid who's 20 years old at this point. He's not going to turn 21 until another couple of months from now. I see all of his flaws as being coachable things where he doesn't recognize what is going on in front of him, but he has the speed, he has the broad shoulders, he's got the long arms. He only had 2 interceptions in his college career. That doesn't concern me nearly as much as the fact that he only gave up 3 total touchdowns over his entire college career. I see a guy whose best football is still ahead of him. If Brendan Cisse from South Carolina is still on the board, number 32 overall, I feel confident that he has the physicality and run support. He has the athletic ability and the upside to absolutely justify a first-round selection.
Yeah, Cisse is a guy that everybody's going to be pointing to in the fan base just because he checks off the size elements that the Seahawks have been known for, the cornerback position. And another South Carolina prospect, certainly fans are going to be interested in that with how well Nick Eamon-Wari played. Even though, as you said, he was an NC State transfer, that should be expected in these discussions. We're going to be talking about a lot of guys that played for multiple schools. As far as pick 32 goes, I love Cisse, but I am over the moon for Chris Johnson from San Diego State. That kid is maybe my favorite cornerback prospect in this draft class. And I know he's not getting that kind of hub, but Rob, you want to know what his passer rating against this year was? 16.7. Like that is like laughable, like somebody mistyped something type numbers. Did not give up a touchdown. Had a bunch of interceptions, a bunch of pass breakups. And I know that he played in the Mountain West, but the Mountain West had some really potent offenses the last couple of years and really good receivers that are in that conference. He shut down all of them. And the thing that I love about this kid, he's only 5'10", 190 pounds. There's going to be people who look at that size and say, oh, wait a second. But it's like, this is not Pete Carroll drafting corners anymore. And heck, Devin Witherspoon is smaller than him, and they loved Devin Witherspoon. Chris Johnson had a missed tackle rate in his college career under 6%. He is a fantastic tackler. He loves to come up and hit people. I just think he is an incredibly well-rounded player that checks off all the boxes that Mike Macdonald is looking for at the cornerback position. If you lose Reek Woolen or Josh Jobe, Chris Johnson's a guy that I think you can put right into Mike Macdonald's defense day one, and this secondary doesn't miss a beat. And I think he's got Pro Bowl, borderline all-pro type tools.
Hey, look, you're preaching to the choir on Chris Johnson. This is a guy that I've been very high on all year long. Literally on an article for foxsports.com where I was ranking those top 50 players, I literally used the expression a personal favorite. This is the Mountain West Conference Defensive Player of the Year. He had 4 interceptions this past season. That is more than the aforementioned Brendan Cisse, one of my favorites that I mentioned a moment ago. That Cisse had in his entire college career. Look, again, Chris Johnson had 4 picks this year. 2 of them he took back to the house. He is as technically refined as any corner in this class. Look, I love him. I am very curious to see what he's going to run at the Combine. That's where I think that Cisse might leap ahead of him, and just in terms of the upside that might be presented there. And that kind of is a perfect segue to the second player that I want to mention here, as far as a guy that I'm really excited to see how he performs at the Combine, because the tape is fantastic. It's just, when I think of Iowa corners, Corbin, I just rarely see guys who run in the 4.4s. And I just think that is basically a requirement to play in the NFL. There are certainly exceptions, But at the same time, if you are going to go in the first round, then typically I want to have a cornerback who is going to be running in the 4.4s. And that's what my biggest question again with TJ Hall from Iowa. Look, he allowed 2 touchdowns in 2025. Both of them came in the bowl game against Diego Pavia, the Heisman Trophy finalist, and an interesting player in his own right. But in the entire regular season, playing against Big Ten competition, TJ Hall didn't give up a single touchdown. He only gave up 6 touchdowns in 4 seasons at Iowa. You and I have been huge proponents of the Iowa Hawkeyes in the past. Kirk Ferentz just seems like every year he churns out quality prospects. This guy is a sound tackler. He can play inside and outside. He's just a good football player. 32 overall is too rich, but I think at the bottom portion of the second round, I think the TJ Hall would make an awful lot of sense.
Yeah, I think he's a really good player that I think's best football is ahead of him. And I think if you're looking at another player from the same conference that maybe wouldn't have been in consideration when Pete Carroll was coaching, but absolutely it would be in consideration for Mike Macdonald. You mentioned the name already, and I'm going to throw it out there again. D'Angelo Pons. I love the term junkyard dog when we're talking about the type of players that Mike Macdonald is looking for. D'Angelo Pons, you could put him as the textbook definition for a junkyard dog. And this is one of the players that started with the James Madison Dukes and then transferred over to Indiana, made that big leap, and suddenly the Hoosiers made the playoffs the last 2 years. He was as critical to the success that Indiana has had in the last 2 years than any player on that roster. And he is one of those guys that maybe he doesn't have the biggest size. Maybe he doesn't have great length, but he plays like he does. He's physical. He's feisty at the point of attack. He loves to get up into your face and press. He plays like he's got 35-inch arms. He's just technically proficient in that regard, and he'll hit you. You can blitz him. That's the other thing Chris Johnson does really well in limited action. They're talking about guys that you can blitz. Mike Macdonald loves corners that he can do that with. We've seen that with more than just Witherspoon. He's blitzed Woolen some. He's blitzed Job some. This is another player that just checks off that all-around box that can play on the outside. He can play in the slot. He can play as a pseudo safety, as a money position. I just think D'Angelo Pons, he's a rare fish in the pond that maybe doesn't look like it physically, but he's got all the tools. I will be shocked if he lasts longer than the middle of the second round. I think he's going to be a guy that teams are going to be in love with because he's also a really high character guy.
He is. He's a terrific football player. He is my 50th ranked prospect, and I think he's going to come in around 5'8". And that's hard to justify ranking a player in the top 50 of any draft class that has that type of size limitations. Corbin, if he was 2 or 3 inches taller, we'd be talking about a top 10 pick. He is a instinctive, physical, incredibly athletic player and a true playmaker. So, yeah, you're preaching to the choir to me with D'Angelo Pons. I'm going to mention a player. We've kind of mentioned Pete Carroll here a couple of times. I'll mention a player that I think that Pete Carroll will be very high on. I think that John Schneider will be very high on, especially considering the fact that I think that with only 4 draft picks, as the Seahawks have currently, they're going to have to be looking for some bargain kind of players. And frankly, I should have mentioned Jonah Coleman from the University of Washington during yesterday's conversation about running backs because I love Jonah Coleman. I feel the same way about Tacario Davis. And I said Pete Carroll, we're talking about a corner for UW who's 6'4", 200 pounds, has elite ball skills. And he only had 3 interceptions, but you watch the interception against Cal Poly, where he basically baited the quarterback and then turned around, got on his horse and made an incredible interception. I mean, you can't tell me this kid doesn't have ball skills. And again, if you're looking to replace, say, a Rick Woolen with a corner who has size, and I think is going to prove his speed here, but he only played 7 games this past season, did not have the capper to his college career that he was hoping for. You mentioned D'Angelo Pons following Kurt Cignetti from James Madison to Indiana. Tacario Davis did the exact same thing following Jed Fish from Arizona to the University of Washington. Tacario Davis is a top 100 caliber player that might not be selected as high because of the injury questions that he had in 2025. He's exactly the type of player who's obviously in the Seahawks backyard that they should know better than anybody, and this kid can play.
And we know that John Schneider's always looking for guys that are from at least the original Pac-12, and we know that that was disintegrated. But Arizona State is a school that he has looked at plenty of times where he's been on site for their pro days. And this is a player that I see that looks like a hybrid of what Pete Carroll and Mike McDonald each prefer at the position. And that's Keith Abney II at Arizona State. And if those of you that are watching on YouTube, you can see a picture of him. He is a specimen. This guy, he's 6 foot. He's listed at 190, but he looks like he is a well-built 190. This is a guy that looks more in the 200, 205 range. Almost looks like a safety, but he's a fluid mover. And what I love about him, he gets his hands on the football. 9 pass breakups this year, a couple of interceptions. And after giving up 4 touchdowns his second season at ASU, he gave up 0 this year. He was as dominant as any corner in the nation in terms of not giving up big plays. He is another guy that doesn't miss a ton of tackles, had a little higher missed tackle rate, but you can play him in the slot a little bit as that power slot. There's a lot of fun stuff you can do with Keith Abney, and I think he is a player maybe as early as the 3rd round that you're looking at, but certainly early day 3 that would make a ton of sense. And it actually kind of reminds me a little bit of Marlon Humphreys with the way that he plays the game. Yeah,
and Humphrey was the 1st round selection, and the only bone I'd have to pick with you at that point, sir, is that I think Keith Abney is going to go on day 2 at the absolute worst. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he's off the board, or could be Seattle selection at number 64 overall. And if he works out and interviews as well as I think that he might this week, then I think that he is a, kind of a sneaky selection to sneak into that late 1st round.
And he could be. Yeah, like I said, I think day 2, maybe early day 3, but if he tests really well, I think you can lock him up there with the production. The film speaks for itself. And another guy that I just think would be the type of character that Mike McDonald and John Schneider are looking for at the cornerback position as well. When we come back, we're going to continue our combine preview. We're going to go to the buffet bashers, the guards, and there's some intriguing ones in this draft class. For those of you that are wanting to push Anthony Bradford, there may be some prospects that can do just that. We're going to dive into it up next here on our Tuesday edition, Locked On Seahawks. Ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your profit boost on any NBA future, and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for 2. That's right. Flights, tickets, the whole experience. If you're already looking at the board and thinking about which team can make a deep run, this is the perfect time to lock in. I love futures this time of year, whether it's picking a team to win the championship or grab a conference title. It adds that extra layer of excitement to every game down the stretch. And now, not only can you pick your cash, but you can also send the cash can send you to the finals. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. He's Rob Rang. A special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Combine week officially here. John Schneider speaking today. We'll get to hear from Mike McDonald tomorrow. A lot going on for the Seahawks in Indianapolis. Let's dive into the NFL Combine on the offensive line, shall we? And the Seahawks are in really good shape continuity-wise. They've got both their tackles locked up on second contracts. Gray's Abel's got 3 more years minimum on his rookie deal. Jalen Sundell, they've got under club control cheap for at least 2 more years. Anthony Bradford is the only player that is not going to be under contract after 2026. And he's been the biggest question mark, whether you're a fan or an analyst looking at this offensive line. So, of course, that lends itself to the discussion. If Anthony Bradford is not going to be on the extension table, then are you looking now for his successor or somebody that could push him right away as a replacement? And while I don't think this is the best guard class I've seen, I think that it is a better guard class than a lot of these analysts are advertising, because I see, at least from a Seahawks perspective, Rob, there are a lot of guards that we're going to see testing this week that I'm just curious to see if their athleticism matches up with what we've seen on film, because there's a lot of players that would seem like really good fits for this West Coast wide zone style run game.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I love the way that you articulated that. Look, I don't feel like this is a pressing need for the Seahawks. I mean, they're starting 5 with key backups are all basically already signed. But if Seattle wants to look towards the future, there are some intriguing prospects available. I've been kind of, touting my top 50 board on foxsports.com. So I'll mention it one more time here right now. But I only have 2 interior offensive linemen among the top 50 selections. That may be a Francis Mayoga, the big right tackle from Miami, gets pinched inside, or a Caden Proctor, same kind of thing. Big tackle from Alabama moves inside. But as far as pure interior offensive linemen, there's Vega Ione, who, oh, by the way, is from Graham Capalis High School in the state of Washington for Penn State. He's an easy first-round selection. He's going to be long off the board by the time the Seahawks are up at number 32 overall. And then the player that I'm going to highlight here, Chase Bisontis from Texas A&M. I have him, I believe it's number 47 overall. Look, this is a guy who has played some right tackle, but I like him better at guard. That's what he's played the last couple of seasons. He has the mobility, the size, and enough power to be able to hold up to those bull rushers, but it's really his mobility. And you mentioned the wide zone blocking scheme. That to me is one of the things I like the most about the 6'5", 315-pound, 3-year starter, Chase Bisontis from A&M. He's gone against elite competition throughout his entire college career. If you want somebody to push Anthony Bradford, Bisontis to me is the player in the top 50 that would make the most sense.
As we've talked about before, I think a lot of NFL teams, at least up to this point, you want to always do your due diligence on why players transfer it. If a guy transfers more than one time, okay, what went into that? And the Seahawks are no different. They are certainly going to be looking into that. You look at a player like Emmanuel Pregnon from Oregon. He's well-traveled. He started his college career a less than heralded player that was at Wyoming for a year. And then he transferred to USC, and he played at USC for 2 years. So one of the blue blood programs in college football, and he played quite a few snaps for the Trojans. Then he leaves USC and goes within the Big Ten. I still is so weird saying that with these West Coast teams, but goes from USC to Oregon to join the Ducks and becomes their starter. And all Pregnon did this year for the playoff-bound Ducks was give up 5 total pressures, 1 sack, and he was the 3rd highest graded zone blocker in the run game by PFF for any position on the offensive line among qualified players. This guy does not look, when you look at him physically, he looks more like the mauling type. He looks like the type of player that would knock defenders off the line of scrimmage and would be best set up for a gap scheme, different than what the Seahawks are operating. But when you turn on the tape, you see a nimble-footed blocker that plays much more athletic than his size. I want to see what the athletic testing looks like for him this week. But this guy mirrors really well because he's light in his feet for a player of his size. And he's really good at executing his reach blocks. He gets his hands on guys with proper targeting set up by his footwork. There's a lot to be excited about him. Now, he can have a tendency to get in trouble with penalties and his hand placement. There's things that are going to need to be worked on. I want to see how he tests. Does it match up with what we saw in his last year at Oregon? Probably a player late day 2 is probably the ceiling for him, especially with the value for inside offensive linemen, but squarely on my radar as an early day 3 guy that could come in right away and push Anthony Bradford for reps.
I 100% agree with you. I think the Pregnon's a good football player. I've been watching him since his days at Wyoming, as you mentioned. I'm going to mention 2 players here quickly that I think are quite possibly going to be more in that third to fourth round range, and maybe even lower than that. And starting out with Billy Schrauth from Notre Dame, 6'4", 319 pounder. This is a team captain, despite the fact that he missed 5 games this past season with a knee injury and 4 games in 2024 with an ankle injury. At the same time, when you watch him when he's healthy, he's a difference maker. And, I remember scouting a player from Alabama, Landon Dickerson, who the Philadelphia Eagles selected in the second round a couple of years back. And when he is healthy, he is a true difference maker. He just has struggled with durability. The Seahawks got a little bit of a discount, of course, with another former Golden Domer, and Riley Mills a year ago. We all saw it turn into a sack during the Super Bowl. I wonder if Billy Schrauth, 6'4", 319 pounds, has left and right guard versatility. I wonder if he is still available, say the third, fourth round, if he might be the starting caliber player that the club wants to jump on here if the discount tag. And then Keelan Rutledge is another player that I think makes some sense as well. You talked about before with Emmanuel Pregnon as a guy that made some transfers. And Keelan Rutledge started at Middle Tennessee State, where he was dominant from the jump, earning All-Conference USA, honors at the right guard position, goes to Georgia Tech for a 2-time All-ACC selection, again, at that right guard position. If you're going to wait until the middle rounds for somebody who could be able to push Anthony Bradford, Keelan Rutledge is a similar type of player. He's going to frustrate you at times because he lunges sometimes. But at 6'4", 330 pounds, so similar type of size as Anthony Bradford, and a guy who has some athletic ability, has power, and then it's just nasty. I mean, physical and combative. The kind of guy the offensive line coaches love. Keelan Rutledge from Georgia Tech is a player that, frankly, isn't getting enough love, nationally speaking.
A player that isn't getting enough love, in my opinion, and I know some of our listeners will be like, gosh darn it, here we go again, another Iowa Hawkeye. But I'm sorry, they kick out really good NFL prospects. I think they are excellent at developing guys to be ready to play early. Now, I know Mason Richmond, he was a 7th-round pick. He might still be a guy that's in competition to be a swing tackle this year for the Seattle Seahawks and just wasn't this season. But Bo Stevens, the big guard, he's 310 pounds, so he's not the biggest guy. He's not built with the same body as Anthony Bradford. But this player went from giving up 7 pressures 2 years ago and no sacks. That's pretty darn good season. He gave up 4 this year with a 99.3% pass block efficiency rate. That was top 3 in the country, Rob, for guards. And I know Iowa does not throw the ball near as much as a lot of other programs, but if you're wondering about his run blocking, he was one of the top 3 highest graded guards for zone blocking. And I think he is going to test very well. If you watch the film on this guy, Iowa runs quite a bit of gap stuff, but when they ran zone schemes, Stevens was the player that immediately stood out when he turned on the tape the last couple of years. And you've already got one Iowa offensive lineman on your team. This is a player that didn't transfer, that was with the Hawkeyes for his entire college career. Bo Stevens on day 3 is a player that I think could end up being a steal for a team like the Seahawks. That's a really good fit. And the last player I want to mention here, how fun would it be to go from having 2 starters that were from North Dakota State to adding a South Dakota State player as your starting right guard, albeit with a little stop along the way at Northwestern this year. Evan Berntsen had a fantastic season, another player who doesn't give up much in pass protection, gave up 5 pressures this year, and was also one of the top zone blockers in college football in his lone season at Northwestern. Before that, he was helping the Jackrabbits get to a bunch of deep playoff runs at the FCS level. Maybe that creates a little bit of tension on that offensive line initially. Well, we're adding a Jackrabbit to the mix, but you know that this group would be cohesive, and another guy that's technically sound that I think is going to test well. And since he stepped up to Big Ten competition for a year, I anticipate that is going to certainly help his standing as a draft prospect as well, early to mid day 3. That could be a target for the Seahawks. As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. And, of course, check out Rob Rang on X as well, at Rob Rang. Coming up on tomorrow's show, we're going to continue talking prospects at the Combine. I know Rob's pumped up to talk about this decorated receiver class on the offensive side of the ball. And we're going to dive into some linebackers on defense and take a look at some players that maybe could push or replace Drake Thomas, depending on what the Seahawks choose to do on that front. Going to be a jam-packed episode. Make sure to listen in. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Go Hawks.